The first grave was shallow, not out of carelessness, nor because of some desperate rush. No, it was deliberate, dug just deep enough for the body to settle, but not so deep that the Empire wouldn't notice. A warning, not a burial. A declaration, not an ending. The Dominion of Varak had never seen a grave before, not on their worlds, not in their long, unchallenged reign over the known galaxy. To them, war was conquest, and conquest was efficiency. Burn the cities, break the people, repurpose the land. No monuments, no remembrance, no markers for the fallen, but now on the cold, barren rock of Fjorn 7, under a sky choked with violet storm clouds, a human kneeled in the dust, hands caked with soil, pressing the final mound of dirt into place. And the Varak noticed. The first grave was shallow, but the Dominion didn't understand its depth yet, because there would be more, and with every grave dug, their empire would begin to understand what it had unleashed. Fjorn 7 was a dead world long before the human arrived. It had never known oceans or forests, only jagged mountains and endless plains of grey dust. The Dominion of Varak used it as a dumping ground for the remnants of their wars, stripped wreckage, discarded prisoners, forgotten battles long settled. To them, it was a graveyard without graves, a wasteland unworthy of memory. But then, the human came. His name had been lost, as if it no longer mattered. The Dominion's records classified him as a Category X insurgent. No name, no rank, no history, just a designation, an anomaly in their otherwise orderly ledger of subjugation. The only thing they knew was that he had survived. Survived Fjorn 7. No Dominion soldier had set foot on the surface in decades. The planet was a forsaken afterthought, an execution without ceremony. Criminals, rebels, and political dissidents were sent here without weapons, without food, without a future. None ever returned. But then the first grave appeared, followed by another and another burial mounds, carefully arranged in neat rows, rising like accusations from the barren ground. Every body marked, every death remembered. The human had turned their forsaken wasteland into a place of remembrance, something the Dominion had long since erased from its lexicon. At first, the Varak had ignored it. Some unfortunate wretch had survived longer than expected. It wasn't worth their time. Then the message arrived, a single transmission sent from a scavenged Dominion comm relay. 4 words, spoken in a voice rough from dust and solitude. "Send more bodies, I'll wait." The Dominion listened, and for the first time in 1,000 worlds, they felt something unfamiliar slithering through their cold-blooded veins. Not anger, not annoyance, unease. The Varak did not bury their dead. They were about to learn why humans did. The first dropships came at dawn, sleek Dominion crafts, their black hulls reflecting the pale glow of Fjorn 7's dying sun. There were 3 of them, light reconnaissance units, not warships. The Varak still believed this was a minor disturbance, an anomaly to be corrected. A survivor to be silenced. Inside the lead ship, Commander Vekral read the reports again. A single human. No confirmed weapons, no known allies, just a voice over the comms and a field of shallow graves. He exhaled slowly, the sound a dry, rasping rattle. Vekral was no fool. He had spent years in the Dominion's war machine, crushing rebellions before they could fester, snuffing out insurgents before they could ignite. This felt different. It wasn't just the defiance. It was the patience. The human had waited. For what? For them. The dropships cut through the storm-heavy sky, descending toward the designated coordinates. The barren expanse stretched endlessly below. Just a wasteland, nothing more. But as they neared the surface, something caught Vekral's eye. A line of graves, not scattered, not random, a precise formation leading directly to the landing site. Vekral's grip tightened on the edge of the console. The human wasn't hiding. He had left them a path. On the ground, the human watched them come. He stood at the edge of the burial field, hands resting lightly on the handle of his shovel. He had no armor, no visible weapons, just the dust-cloaked remains of a Dominion prisoner's uniform. But wind whipped through the silence, carrying the scent of disturbed earth. The Varak disembarked in disciplined formation, tall, sinewy figures with segmented carapace plating, their plasma rifles humming in the stillness. Vekral stepped forward, his mandibles clicking softly. "You're human," he said, voice thick with contempt. The man nodded. "Used to be." Vekral's gaze flickered to the field of graves. "What is this?" The human's eyes were unreadable. Memory. A pause. Then, "You've buried our dead." "No." The man's fingers curled against the wooden grip of the shovel. "I've buried mine." Vekral's mandibles flared. "There were no humans sent here." The man's lips twitched, something like a smile but colder. "You don't bury your dead doesn't mean they don't deserve it." The wind howled between them. Something primal crawled through Vekral's chest, something the Dominion had long since forgotten. A chill. A human alone on a dead world should have been desperate, feral. But this one was neither. He was waiting. He had prepared, and as the Varak soldiers fanned out, scanning the graves, Vekral realized something that sent ice through his veins. There weren't just bodies in those graves. There were weapons. The first shot came from the ground. A buried plasma charge, rigged beneath the loose soil of a freshly dug grave. The explosion tore through the Varak formation, sending bodies flying, their sleek carapace armor cracking under the force. Smoke and dust erupted into the air, choking the early morning light. The human moved before the first corpse hit the ground. Vekral staggered back, instinct screaming as he watched the impossible unfold. The graves, they were traps, every single one of them. Not markers of the dead, but preparations for the living. The Varak scrambled for cover, their disciplined ranks thrown into disarray. From beneath the churned-up soil, hidden caches of salvaged Dominion weapons were pulled free. Plasma rifles, detonation charges, even sharpened shards of repurposed ship plating. Tools of the forgotten, resurrected for war. The human was already among them, not a berserker, not a desperate animal, but methodical, precise. He moved through the smoke like a ghost, rifle kicking against his shoulder. A Varak soldier turned, caught. Only a glimpse of a dirt-streaked face before his head snapped back, plasma fire carving through his skull. Another tried to call for reinforcements, but a blade, fashioned from the twisted remains of a Dominion hull, punched through his throat before the words could escape. Vekral's mandibles clenched as he rallied his remaining troops. "Fall! Back! Defensive formation!" But the human didn't let them. He hunted them. Every time a Varak took cover, a buried detonation charge erupted beneath them. Every time they regrouped, a figure emerged from the dust, striking fast and vanishing. Before the next plasma bolt could find its mark, it was impossible. This was supposed to be a one-sided extermination, a minor disturbance, a routine operation. Instead, they were being slaughtered. Vekral ducked behind a ruined bulkhead, claws trembling around his rifle. He had studied human warfare. He had watched them fight in the Dominion's conquests. Brutal, reckless creatures who hurled themselves into battle without regard for survival. This was not that. This was cold, calculated, deliberate. This was something far worse. A shadow moved through the dust, silent, watching. Vekral barely had time to react before a voice cut through the haze, low and unrelenting. "You sent me here to die." A pause, a flicker of movement. "You should have sent more." The Dominion had never feared the dead. But now, as the last of his squad fell, Vekral understood something too late. The dead don't rest when a human starts digging graves. Vekral lay wounded, his carapace scorched, mandibles twitching. As he struggled to stand, The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burned flesh. His soldiers were gone, some reduced to unrecognizable husks, others buried in the very graves they had once scoffed at. The human stepped forward, not in triumph, not with rage, with purpose. His rifle was gone, its charge depleted, but the shovel remained, gripped tight, its worn handle stained with blood and ash. The same hands that had buried the fallen now wielded the tool of their remembrance as a weapon. Vekral forced a rattling breath. This is madness." The human tilted his head. "No, it's balance." He crouched beside the broken Varak commander, planting the shovel in the dirt. "Your kind wipes out entire worlds and calls it conquest. You leave the dead. Unburied, call it efficiency. But now," he gestured to the graves, the neat rows stretching beyond the haze, "now the dead have a voice." Vekral's secondary eyelids flickered in confusion. "You think this changes anything?" His tone was bitter, but there was something beneath it, a crack in his conviction. The human didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his tattered uniform and pulled out a small beacon device. Dominion Standard Issue. Vekral's throat tightened. A distress signal. The human had let them send it. A low tremor rumbled through the sky as the first Dominion warships broke through the cloud cover. Reinforcements. More than Vekral had expected. They had dismissed this world for decades, but after today, after this massacre, they had come in force. The human should have looked afraid. He should have looked desperate. Instead, he stood, watching the skies, a slow exhale leaving his lips. And then he smiled. Not at them. At the hundreds of shadows rising from the dust. Figures emerged from the ruins, scarred, hardened survivors. Of Fjorn 7, the Dominion's forgotten executions. The men and women they had condemned to die alone on this rock. They were no longer prisoners. They were no longer victims. They were his army. Vekral's eyes widened. The human hadn't just buried the dead. He had raised an army from their graves, and as the Dominion fleet prepared to land, they would soon learn the truth. The war they thought they had won was only beginning. The Dominion warships loomed over. Fjorn 7 like silent gods, their engines humming with restrained fury. From their darkened hulls, squads of Varak shock troopers descended, weapons primed, formations perfect. This was no longer a simple cleanup. This was retaliation. They expected a single insurgent. What they found instead was an uprising. The graves had not just been markers of the fallen. They had been a message, a foundation, a call to arms. The prisoners, the forsaken, the forgotten, they had all heard it. And when the time came, they answered. They emerged from the ruins, scarred, skeletal shadows of those the Dominion had left for dead. They carried salvaged rifles, sharpened debris, bare hands if nothing else. It did not matter. They had already lost everything once. There was no fear left in them. At their head, the human stood, his tattered uniform whipping in the storm-racked wind, his hands stained with blood and earth. He did not speak. He did not have to. The first shot came from above. A Dominion gunship strafed low, plasma cannons spitting fire. The ground convulsed with explosions, but the human did not flinch. He had spent too long among the graves to fear death. Instead, he raised his hand. The order was silent, but the response was thunder. The insurgents struck. A hail of plasma fire met the Dominion forces, cutting through their ranks with brutal efficiency. Makeshift explosives, buried in old Dominion wreckage, turned the landing zone into a death trap. The wasteland itself had become their weapon. The battle was not a war of numbers. It was a war of ghosts. Every fallen Varak became another body for the graveyard. Every crater left by a Dominion blast was filled with another reminder. They had come to wipe away history. Instead, they had become part of it. Above, on the Dominion flagship, a decision was being made. Fleetmaster Zorvoon watched from the bridge. His cold reptilian eyes narrowed. The reports were chaotic. Impossible. A human raising an army from nothing. A grave digger forcing the Dominion's hand. It was supposed to be an execution, a purge, not a war. His claws flexed against the metal railing. This was no longer about dominance. This was about control. The Dominion did not allow memory. The Dominion did not allow legends, and that's exactly what this human was becoming. He turned to his officers. Burn the planet. Silence, not hesitation, not reluctance, just calculated finality. The Dominion's response to rebellion had always been absolute. If a world resisted, it ceased to exist. No bodies, no graves, no remembrance. On the surface, the human looked up. Through the thick clouds, through the rising flames of battle, he saw it. The end. The warships were adjusting position. He had seen this before. Orbital bombardment. A scorched Earth protocol. They were going to erase Fjorn 7, erase the rebellion, erase him. The others saw it too. Some faltered, fear creeping in. But the human? He just smiled, because he had been preparing for this from the moment he dug the first grave, because the Dominion had just made a fatal mistake. They thought they were wiping out a battlefield. They were walking into a trap. The first orbital strike hit the surface like a dying star. A blinding column of fire erupted from the sky, swallowing the battlefield in its fury. The Dominion did not conquer planets. They erased them. But this time, they had made a mistake. Sorvun watched from the command bridge. The monitors flickered with seismic readings. His officers reported impact after impact, the surface of Fjorn 7 breaking apart under the weight of their bombardment. And yet, something was wrong. The graves. They weren't just markers. They weren't just traps. They were coordinates. Beneath the surface of Fjorn 7, the real battle began. The human had always known the Dominion's arrogance. He had known they would come with fire and death, not negotiations, and so he had dug. Not just graves, not just trenches, tunnels. Deep beneath the desolate plains, a forgotten underworld stretched far beyond what the Dominion had ever surveyed. Caverns carved by ancient tectonic shifts, ruined structures from wars so old even the Varak had no records of them, and the human had used them. He hadn't just buried the dead, he had buried his army. So when the Dominion's fire rained down, when the surface burned and the air turned to ash, they did not die. They waited, and then they rose. Sorvun's comms erupted with panic. They're still alive. Movement underground. Unknown passageways. Weapons fire. Our squads are being slaughtered. Impossible. The planet was supposed to be dead. The prisoners were supposed to be gone. Then the human's voice came through the open channel. Rough. Calm. Final. You tried to erase us. A pause. A crackle of static. You should have dug deeper. The Dominion fleet never left Fjorn 7. They came to burn a rebellion and found their own graveyard instead. One by one, their warships fell silent. Overrun from within, torn apart by a resistance that refused to die. They had buried entire civilizations in their conquest, but this time they had buried themselves. No reinforcements came, no records remained. Fjorn 7 became a whispered legend, a name the Varak refused to speak, a place where the dead were honored, and where those who tried to erase them were lost to the void. And the human, no one knew. Maybe he died with the planet. Maybe he walked away, leaving the Dominion's ghosts behind. Or maybe, on some distant world, beneath another uncaring sky. He was digging again. The end. HFY victory secured. Dominion eradicated. Humanity's legend lives on.